Hi everyone, welcome to the VC panel for opportunities in ASEAN. And today we are very excited to have two very distinguished and experienced investor, Jennifer Ho, the principal at Integral Partners, as well as Vadim, from the managing director at Vickers Ventures. And personally, I'm extremely excited about this panel session today because me as a founder from funding societies, we're always curious in terms of how do VCs think about investments, especially during this unprecedented time of COVID, and of course, what happens after this whole COVID period. So with that in mind, I'll have both panelists to make introductions about themselves, and we can jump into some discussions in terms of how they think about the space, how their portfolio have pivoted or adjusted, and how they think moving forward the scene for investments and opportunities in Southeast Asia. So starting off with Jennifer, ladies first, why not give a quick introduction about yourself before we move on to Vadim.
Hey guys, my name is Jennifer. I'm a partner at Integral Partners, which is an early stage VC fund based in Singapore that focuses on investments in the fintech, insurtech, and digital health space. We launched Fund 1 in 2017. We made 18 investments in that fund, and we're in the process of launching Fund 2. So very excited to be here with you all today.
I'm on mute.
Hello.
Really glad.
Okay, I'm Vadim. I'm a managing director at Vickers Venture Partners. You probably know us because we are the oldest and the largest venture capital firm in Southeast Asia, established 16 years ago by a gentleman called Dr. Phinian Tan. He's basically celebrity in Singapore, so everyone knows him. I joined Vickers 4 years ago. I used to work for family office, was on the other side of the board, but joined 4 years ago and never regret a day because I'm speaking to people smarter than me every day, which is like a huge benefit of this job. So I'm learning every day about something new, about biodegradable plastic, about new generation X-ray, about geothermal energy. So basically, like being engineer by training, I learn about medtech, I learn about molecular biology, about vaccines. So like every day I'm getting smarter. So we're right now raising our fund number 6, aiming at $500 million. I think it's good for introduction. Okay, well, I will pass the button back to our moderator.
Sure, thanks a lot for the introduction. So we have one very experienced and long-time investors in Singapore, and of course we have a newer fund, new age fund in Integral Partners. But both of them are no strangers to Singapore and Southeast Asia. And perhaps a quick introduction about myself. I'm Kelvin. I'm the co-founder of Funding Societies. We are a Series C fintech company in Southeast Asia, backed by Sequoia and SoftBank. And to us, even though we have raised a few rounds of fund, we are always intrigued by how investors think, and this is not a stagnant situation, right? The investors thinking it always evolves along the way. So I'm really excited to get this started. So I think the top of mind for everyone during this period is really COVID, right? Even as we reach perhaps halfway point in terms of the COVID situation. Curious about both funds, for Vadim as well as Jennifer. How have you or your fund invested differently this year, be it at the start of the year or as we come to the end of the year, as compared to say same time last year? Perhaps this time around we have Vadim to kick off the conversation.
Okay, so we were lucky enough. We started fundraising and basically investing pre-COVID. We started in October last year. I think we closed about 200 million by the COVID started, and our fund was almost fully allocated. So because in a space that we're investing, we're typically tracking companies for a very long time before we pull the trigger, because deep tech is our focus, and technology is typically takes a lot of time to develop. So sometimes we track a company for a year before we pull the trigger, because it could be too early for us, but we like the space, we like the team, so we're happy to track them. So basically when COVID started, we are in a process of closing multiple deals. It didn't derail us, it just slowed it down. But we are lucky enough, we are not affected at all probably COVID even benefited for us because COVID separated men from boys. So, and we are shining in this new environment because our strategy was very safe, appeared to be very safe. So since we were investing in tech and biotech and all these industries, they just propelled by COVID. You see what's happening. All these shared economies are out, like gaming is out, but all companies that are performing right now, it's a technology company and life science. And the amount of money right now is available is unbelievable because all this government stimulus, they basically were reshuffled and come back to the economy. Look what happens on the stock market. And a similar situation, I feel it, happens in our space. But right now it's just more concentrated. Because right now it's like, from investors' point of view, from LP's point of view, it's a flight to quality. So if you have a choice whether to invest in emerging manager or established manager, you don't take a chance to invest in emerging manager. So you just pile up on the guys with a very long track record and with a portfolio which is resilient to COVID. Look at our portfolio. We have like a COVID vaccine company. We have a COVID therapeutic company. They were not aiming at COVID at pre-COVID. We invested in them but pre-COVID. But they just pivoted. For example, our COVID vaccine company, they were aiming at dengue and yellow fever vaccine. But they just pivoted, and right now they're developing novel, completely different COVID vaccine and already starting human clinical trials.
So it sounds like you went more aggressive, given your investments were all mostly in tech. Do you went more aggressive, or do you adjust the valuation?
Nothing changed. We are not more aggressive because we are doing our job as we were doing it pre-COVID, and we continue to do it. And from my point of view, the situation just become more crystal clear. So, it's like a severe situation. Weak animals die, and strong animals just survive and become stronger. So from my point of view, it's just like a watershed. So strong animal will become stronger, weak animal will die. Similar for companies. To be honest, like we see the similar situation for companies. Strong companies, they don't have problem to raise money. They're raising money and they are still oversubscribed. For example, we closed the round for our biodegradable plastic company. They were like 3 times oversubscribed at the middle of the COVID situation, at the middle of lockdown. This actually happened like in March, April. We were sitting in lockdown and these people like 3 times oversubscribed. Because like investors are like Koch Industries, IKEA. So these guys are not affected at all. So COVID, no COVID, people still eating, people still drinking, people still go to IKEA. So this is why like I don't see so much negative impact from COVID.
So not much change, but there's a lot more clarity. How about Jennifer? Do you invest differently this year compared to last year?
I think it's been very fortunate for us in the sense that the sectors that we have always been traditionally focused on were the ones that benefited immensely, as Vadim correctly pointed out, from the effect of the pandemic. And so the way I think that our approach has changed was that when we went into lockdown, we were very hyper-focused on making sure that there was enough runway across the portfolio companies. And the nice surprise for us is, as Vadim pointed out, the ones everybody kind of emerged from the lockdown with at least 18 months of runway, which is exactly what we wanted to see happen. We had companies who were very well placed to kind of take advantage of this particular moment in time. We also had companies that benefited immensely from the long-term trends and the second-order effects of COVID-19, but that needed a little bit more help to kind of get through the short term. And those are the ones that we focused on. And so our deployment has been I would say, a little bit more cautious than we historically would have liked for it to be, because we wanted to make sure that we have sufficient reserves to support the existing portfolio. But it's very clear that crisis years are the years in which fund returns tend to actually go through the roof in the long run. So very much looking for opportunities in the space now. And then as we launch Fund 2 in Q1, adding health tech to our strategy wasn't the plan because of COVID. It's always kind of been on the horizon for us, but it's a very fortunate kind of confluence of events.
So how do you reconcile the two things that was said, right? One was that, hey, there's a lot more clarity because the strong gets stronger, the weak gets weaker, right? But at the same time, investors are more cautious during this period of time because it becomes clearer. Technically, you don't have, it is the level of caution is less, right? Because you can see the trend very clearly. How do you balance between clarity of the, or rather the market uncertainty for the stronger players versus the caution that you exercise with this macro context?
I think the winners and the losers become a lot more clear in this environment. And I think you want to be a lot more aggressive about backing the winners as opposed to basically taking a little bit more of a concentrated approach actually than before, where you might look at a company and say, hey, I can see some really good stuff happening here. I can also see where the risks are. I think the pandemic has very much clarified how we think about those risks and which risks we are willing and not willing to kind of take a flyer on, basically.
So given that, I think investors are taking more concentrated bets to better companies. Do you actually face more competition among yourself for stronger companies, especially for funds that have just raised new capital, right, with significant dry powder to deploy? So do you actually face more competition in the better deals among yourself? And I guess that applies to both Vadim as well as Jennifer. Yeah.
No, in our case, we are in a stratosphere where we play. There are very few birds flying, so they're not competitors. They're friends because the space that we're investing, we're a global fund first of all. So despite the fact that I'm sitting in Singapore, we have invested more in US than in Asia, from our latest fund. So we are playing a global game on a global scale. So this is why our deal flow is tremendous. We just filtering it. So we see maybe 5,000 deals a year, investing in 10. But we have 7 offices, 30 people to filter it. In our case, competition is not the right word in the space that what we are doing. Because, for example, we invested in a vaccine company. The founder, he's 68 years old professor from Oxford. And he was actually struggling to raise money even before COVID, because most of VCs are generalists. They invest in everything. Today they invest in game, tomorrow in a social network, next day is a shared economy. And when he is coming to meet them, nobody understands what he is talking about. They need to invite another professor to translate to them what he is talking about. But in our case, we've got Dr. Xin Hon Lim. He actually received a medal from President of Singapore as the brightest scientist below 35. He's officially brightest below 35 in the biotech. So this professor from Oxford almost kissed him when he talking to him. So because he was the first guy in half a year who understands what he is talking about on the same level. So this is why there is no competition, because there are so very few people who understand the stuff that they are doing. For example, the latest guy that were hired, Dr. Faria in London, he is PhD in photonic physics from Cambridge, and he used to be head of AI for Deloitte. So, and after we hired him, we invested into new X-ray, laser-based X-ray. It's basically like a rocket science. It's literally rocket science. The founder, he used to be responsible for military lasers at Livermore National Laboratory in US. So the stuff that they're doing is maybe 10 people in the world who actually understand what he's doing. So this is why it's not difficult. The main thing that people benefiting from our investments, that after Vickers gave them a term sheet, they go around and saying, okay, Vickers verified our technology, please give us money. So, and other investors that, okay, if Vickers already in, we're obviously in because it means that your technology works. Because typical investors, they're finance guys, but they're not technology guys. It's very expensive to run a team with 8 PhDs in different verticals, and not many VCs can afford it.
So it sounds like from a deep tech perspective, there's less competition because not many understand that.
Not many players, and the discovery. We invest in a kind of a Goldilocks zone, because if it's too early, it's just an alarm. It's too early for us. There is nothing to protect. If everyone knows and everyone understands what is this technology, it's already in billions. It's too late for us. So we invest in what it's already proven. They've got already like a patents, trademarks, and trade secrets, but nobody believes to them yet. So, and this is our sweet spot. So nobody believes. They're still relatively cheap, and we're investing. So, and considering that this Goldilocks zone, you need to discover it, you need to track these companies. So we usually have more companies on our table than we have money, because our investment rate is so fast that we usually run out of money before investment period is end.
I understand. Jennifer, do you agree? Given that I think in Integra, or at least I look at background, you graduated Magnus cum laude at Amherst, right, at Liberas College. Do you observe the same thing, or do you agree with what Vadim has said about competitions? If you take a niche approach, you'll be fine. And do you observe as much more competition in quality companies?
Well, as a sector-focused fund, that has always kind of been one of our strengths. And a lot of the founders that we invest in, as Vadim correctly pointed out, are founders whom we've had long relationships with, right? Where we may have tracked, for example, a company that they founded before and chose not to invest. And that's kind of through both the fund, but also like the relationships of the partners of the fund and the ones that they've built over time, even pre-Integra. But I think the other point about competition is that the pandemic has caused a lot of companies to be far more willing to raise larger rounds of capital to kind of tighten their belts and make sure that they have sufficient runway. And so to that extent, I think it's actually created a more collaborative atmosphere in the VC ecosystem here, because we all want to make sure that there is a panel of investors supporting our company, so it's not just us, and they are all kind of willing to take the company forward to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage, and so that's been great.
So collaboration seems to have increased along the way, but given that the pandemic does I think on a macro perspective hurt or slow down the economy, do you actually see more opportunities coming up along the way from an overall broader perspective, or fewer ones, especially in more niche areas? And if so, what do you all see are the key opportunities and in terms of investments? Maybe from Jennifer, and then we can move on to Vadim.
Sure. So one of the companies that we invested in out of Fund 1 is a company called Flow, which used to be known as Asia Collect, which is a tech-enabled or tech-forward debt collection company that only does digital collection in an ethical way. And it's been a company that's been growing really nicely for the last couple of years, but this is really their time to shine, right? So it's an example of a countercyclical investment that we made that is really starting to pay off. First, there's this huge structural shift away from field collection to digital-only collection. And there aren't that many companies in Southeast Asia today that actually even have that capability. And second, when you kind of do digital collection, you have a huge opportunity to really take control of the experience of the person you're collecting from, the ultimate borrower, because every interaction with the borrower is tracked. And so then how do you create an experience that actually is ethical and empathetic? And when you have those two things, I think, going back to your original question as to what the opportunities are in this space, I think there have been a lot of areas within fintech even that have been kind of neglected because huge amounts of capital have gone into very specific sectors of the industry. And now with the cycle turning, you are starting to see interest kind of really pick up in countercyclical parts of fintech.
So it sounds like there are pockets of fintech. I'm really glad that you said it because we're in a fintech space. From the perspective, do you see an overall decline in terms of opportunities because it's so concentrated in those few in a selected few areas? And if so, what are the selected few areas that you see are the rising spots? Vadim. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So basically, because we're investing in science, we're investing in scientific discoveries. And science, it's a very long process to discover something. So this, like 6-8 months of COVID or 1 year of COVID, it's basically nothing in terms of discovery time. You know that average time for drug development, normal drug, not vaccine, normal drug during the COVID, average time of drug development is 8 years. So like whatever happens 1 year off does not affect us at all. For example, we invested into a geothermal energy company, which is able to deliver geothermal energy anywhere. You don't need to be at the ring of fire. You don't need to drill into New Zealand or whatever. Actually, they are doing study in Singapore to make Singapore energy independent. So, but to discover, to come to this stage where they were ready to invest, it took them maybe 5 years from lab to like a pre-industrial stage. So, like we are not affected because this is just a blip on a long-term investment strategy. And since like these scientists, they just keep working on their discoveries and new companies emerging, it's obviously a little bit more difficult for them to raise money because seed stage is completely destroyed. Early stage funds, I don't see, like maybe we will see this effect with some delay. So maybe like next year we will see effect that actually this early stage small funds who were investing on 100K, they completely wiped out. So my expectation, like my feeling that these people who are suffering the most. But for big guys like, all these top funds like Sequoia, Partners Fund, they are raising bigger and bigger rounds, but it's obviously coming to late stage companies. And in our case, we co-invest a lot with strategics. So, for example, we've got FX trading platform in Singapore, Spark Systems, Wong Ju Seng. He's a serial entrepreneur, sold one company to Ant Financial, received grant from MAS, Singapore Central Bank, to launch his next company. Co-investors with us, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, HSBC. Look, these guys not affected. COVID, no COVID, their coffers are almost full. This is why it's so easy to raise money if you're in the right place and with the right co-investors. No difficult at all.
So we have been talking about a lot of opportunity, a lot of examples of companies that has meant to be in the right space and rode on the wave, right? Can you share perhaps, and there's always a saying, never waste a crisis. Can you share perhaps one or two of your portfolio companies that happen to be in the wrong space in this period of time? Because reality is that a lot of companies are probably more adversely impacted by COVID than it was positively support, right? How have they used this as an opportunity for growth, if at all, or at least mitigate the downside risk during this period of time?
Sure. Vadim, go ahead.
No, please go ahead. Ladies first.
Well, first I want to thank Vadim for calling out Spark Systems because that's been one of the shining stars in our portfolio this year, and one that we are, it's a pleasure to have Vickers on board as a co-investor with us. But in terms of the companies that I think have chosen to use this time as a way to grow, even kind of through difficulty, I would say we have probably 2 or 3 companies, and I won't call them out by name, that were kind of a digital interface, right, between banks and their customers in some way, shape, or form. Some of those banks were able to kind of transition very smoothly to work from home. And some of those banks were not, right? They were ones who relied on having people pushing paper in the office at the back end of whatever kind of user experience you're delivering on the front end. And in those instances, I think, as I pointed out earlier in terms of companies that we think will ultimately do well in the future, because they are the companies that have been actively pushing industry stakeholders to do better in terms of driving digital adoption, and have been kind of banging their heads against the wall until this pandemic hit. Those are the ones that will survive and go on to do well, but in the short run have made some very difficult decisions when it comes to manpower and resource allocation. The surprise has been the fact that they have also been able to deliver what has actually been ultimately, like post-lockdown, much better results, even on much leaner teams. And so I think it's been not just a reversion to quality, I think, as Vadim pointed out, but also the ability to kind of consolidate and then strengthen your strategy going forward.
You're on mute.
So it sounds like some companies, even though maybe against the cycle, but have been able to use this opportunity to consolidate. How about Vadim? What are any companies or examples that are
in our case, because like we become deep tech focused investors relatively recently. For example, Fund 6, we allocated to 14 companies, all of them in deep tech space, none of them affected. As I mentioned, some of them even benefiting from COVID. From our earlier funds, when we were not so precise in terms of deep tech, when we were investing a little bit around, we've got like shared economy company in Thailand from earlier fund. So, okay, it's a complete write-off. But because it was not a core strategy and we invested very little, you know, our strategy to pile up on winners. So if you are a winner, we are piling up and we're disproportionately allocate to this particular company. And we've got a few like fringes, you know, like take a trial, like research and development space, where we put like 1 million, 2 million. If this company fail, no, okay, we regret because it's like your children. So and they failed only because we pulled the plug. They probably blame us that we didn't help them at the tough moment. But this is like you know, it's a counterintuitive business. You are not helping your weakest child. You are helping your strongest child. So this is like why we are piling on winners and why we are letting our weakest child to die quickly with less suffering as possible. So this is like, okay, good example of where not to invest, because all this shared economy business, it's fine when sun and shining, but when it's rain and storm, so these guys are first to suffer. So this is why, like, for example, biodegradable plastic company will never die, and this shared economy company, okay, they died, but quickly and painlessly, hopefully.
So you have also liberated some of the weaker companies, portfolio companies, to
because they died because of us. So it's like we should accept that the company dies because you stop financing them. But obviously, if you continue giving them money, but it's a giving good money after bad money after good money after bad money. So you don't do it. This is like a tough life.
I can imagine being a founder myself. We have been quite fortunate to have to be at the right side, but at the same time, I think that we feel for the other companies. Just now, Jennifer mentioned that there was a pleasant surprise that this time has really helped companies to crystallize their strategy, or their portfolio companies to crystallize their strategy. What other pleasant surprise or rude shocks do you experience for your fund or their portfolio companies during this period of time? Because many people make predictions, right? And as we all know, probably half of the predictions are not accurate. What are the pleasant surprises or rude shocks that you have encountered for your company or your portfolio companies, or your fund or portfolio companies along the way? Maybe with Vadim first.
You know, there is a very good saying. It's very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. So obviously, in our case, like we know that. As I mentioned at the beginning, the strongest will survive, the weakest will die. So we don't see, because situation, like, I don't believe that after COVID it will be the new world. Everyone works remotely, or we don't need offices anymore. It will be new economy. Like, people forget bad things very quickly. This is like how our mind is wired. So they forget bad things very quickly, and life will be back to more normal in a couple years' time. And obviously, like, we'll be shining again.
So you think that it will be back to the normal as we have known?
Yeah, I maybe slight adjustments. Okay, it will be not 1,000 people in the office at the same time, maybe 800 people at the office at the same time. Some of them working from home, and like I've got a friend. She was like a young mother, and she was begging to her boss, and she works in a bank, and she was begging to her boss to let her work from home 1 day a week. And no, it's impossible. It's a bank secrecy. You can't do it. But right now, the whole bank worked from home like for 2 months, and like nothing happened. Bank didn't go bankrupt, so it's possible when you want to do it. So I think people will be more flexible, more accommodating for needs. But like from your own experience that like interaction is the most important. So, and if everyone locked down at home, so the interaction is suffering, and the interaction is creating creativity, and everything is linked together. And it's very difficult to invest in. For example, lifetime of the fund is 10 years, and that like average marriage term in Singapore 7 something, so like 7.9 years. So basically we should be more careful before we invest in a company, because it's 10-year fund. We're supposed to stay with people like for 10 years. Then you are looking for your spouse. So how do you supposed to do it remotely without like? I'm not ready. I'm not ready to choose like spouse for over Zoom.
So clearly, Tinder is not meant for looking for spouse.
Yeah.
So this is why I believe that like human interaction will prevail, and we will be back to normal, talking to people live and looking at the body language, how they answer your questions before we give money to them.
I'm actually really interested in the new normal conversation, or the not so new normal, but I'll come back to that. So Jennifer, pleasant surprises or rude shocks with all the predictions that have that were going in the first quarter this year?
I think I don't know if this is a pleasant surprise or a rude shock, but it's kind of like when it rains, it pours. And so, I think we, as a kind of B2B fintech investor, we've had a lot of companies that were up until COVID really the ones who were responsible for evangelizing, right, about digital adoption, or kind of convincing banks that there is a different way, a more efficient way, a better way to do something. And when the tide turns and you've got kind of customers calling you and being like, we need help now, then really the problem is, how do you pick and choose your priorities? Because, like delivering average results on 15 different initiatives can kill you just as easily as not having demand at all. And watching our founders kind of transition from that and learning to kind of decide which priorities to go after has been a really interesting thing to see over this time.
I like how some of the things that you have said is exactly what funding societies have done along the way.
Well, maybe Kelvin, it's your turn. Given we only have two panelists on this conversation, tell us a little bit about how you guys have adapted.
So, frankly, when quarter one came about, we were worried, especially when our shareholders Sequoia sent out the Black Swan event article.
They done it so wrong. you see right now. They should recall it right now.
Actually, but thanks to that, we have actually made adjustments, perhaps ahead of many other players, and very much focus on streamlining. So we took the opportunity to streamline the business to stay a lot more focused, and that has also helped us to ride out the COVID situation a lot earlier. So for example, we were fortunate to close our round in Q1 quickly because some of the investors were dragging their feet. We saw that what is happening in China. We quickly called them up to wire the money, right? So that once the money is in our bank account, it's safe. We don't have to sign a contract, but the money is in our account. That's fine. But the investor shareholders were predicting that, hey, don't expect to get more money during this year. But the fortunate thing is that we have been getting more money along the way until today. And I think the trend that you have mentioned about collaborative investors, that investors are more willing to collaborate because they want their companies to raise more money. I think that's very, very true. We see that more strategics piling in. I think that makes sense as well. That was very clear as well. So we do see that the strategy becoming more focused, more sharpened, business more streamlined along the way. But I think to us, the VC's view is always very interesting and important to us, right? Because at the end of the day, we are raising money from your. In your view, if we all look for, so we have talked about how things have been in the last 6-9 months or so since COVID exploded in February, March, right? And we talk about opportunities in tech. Looking forward, what do you think are the key opportunities in Southeast Asia in the next 6 to 12 months, especially given that I wouldn't say tech is necessarily, like deep tech is necessarily the strength of Southeast Asia, frankly, or at least it's very limited to a few, right? What do you think is the key investment style opportunities in Southeast Asia, especially in the next 6 to 12 months? Or if you think that tech it is a strength in Southeast Asia, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe start with Vadim first.
Look, obviously Southeast Asia is not the hotbed for deep tech. You will not find a new drug discovery company in Vietnam. Singapore is a pretty good place for deep tech, and we invested in a few deep tech companies in Singapore. For example, new kidney dialysis machine, our company AWAC. It's a Singaporean company, first trial in Singapore, phase 2 they're going to do in US. They're based in Singapore, licensed technology from University UCLA, and developed it here. So we believe that there are some pockets of expertise in Singapore exist because Singaporean government spent tremendous amount of money into blue sky research. So few of these results are coming into industry, so commercializing and entrepreneurs emerging. So I believe there is a possibility. Obviously, again, in our case, we are looking the best solution globally. It shouldn't be a best in Singapore. It's like gravity. If gravity works in Singapore, it works everywhere. So if it's pancreatic cancer drug, people don't care from what country it's coming as soon as it works. So this is why our deal flow is global, and we competing them on the same table. So opportunities are emerging, and again, there is science have not stopped, and scientists haven't stopped thinking because of COVID. So we believe that, as I mentioned before, competition at early stage completely gone. So it will be very difficult to raise seed money. But for people who already survived this crisis, they will just emerge stronger. And as Jennifer said, concentration, they're going into spotlight. These good guys, they're going into spotlight. It would be easier to spot them.
Yeah. If I just probe further, right? So you mentioned about there was some pockets of opportunities in deep tech in Singapore. What are those pockets?
Life science. Life science is a good space, and we've got expertise in life science. We're tracking a few companies. We invested in a few companies. So life science is a good space to be. So biotech is a strong in Singapore. You see fintech. Jennifer and I were invested in the same company. There could be more. So why not? And Singapore, we are part of fintech festival. So we must be bullish. Otherwise, they will not call us to talk again. We must be bullish on Singaporean fintech. This digital banking license was distributed, and we have a fantastic company, MuchMove, that haven't received the license, but it didn't make it any worse because they will be getting license in Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, etc. But they're going strong, and the market in Southeast Asia for this kind of business is very hot. So we believe that this space very much in demand. So there are like a few very, very nice places to have a look at.
Yeah. I completely agree, and I will not blow the trumpet on fintech, but I think there is a research that shows that fintech, at least in the credit space, is driven by three factors: GDP per capita or GDP growth, which high in Singapore, fast growing in other markets. Number two is learner index, basically level of competition from banking, so a bit weaker in the emerging markets, which is conducive for fintech. And then finally, suitability of regulations. I think that's something that's testament of what MES's work is. So we do think that fintech is a great space. But Jennifer, opportunities in Southeast Asia.
And I think, unlike Vadim, who has the luxury of taking a global view, for us, a regional view is very important, right? Because, we are a much smaller fund and the mandate is very much regional in nature. And one of the things that we've really noticed over this period during lockdown is we've been watching kind of adoption of digital payments, which, is something that has been a conversation in fintech for a very, very, very long time. But you have the countries in Southeast Asia who have invested in kind of a nationwide retail real-time payments infrastructure. So you've got Singapore, obviously, which, has always been far more digitized than the rest of the region with Fast. You have Thailand with Prompt Pay. You have the Philippines with InstaPay. And then you have the countries that don't. Even though everybody has seen a dramatic increase in adoption of digital payments, the ones who have invested in that nationwide infrastructure have seen a far more dramatic increase. And so kind of like UPI in India, I think what is going to be very interesting over the next few years is to watch what kind of startups emerge to take advantage of that new kind of infrastructure to drive even more value for the ecosystem. So that's what I'm most excited about in the area of fintech today.
And so digital payments which makes more consumers going digital from a fintech perspective. I'll ask one more question, and then I'll open up for Q&A. Right? That what do you think would be the key trends that characterize fintech's opportunity in Southeast Asia? Because some of the things that you have briefly alluded, for example, increase in digital payments proliferations could be one. The potential flight to quality, as well as early stage players being wiped out, does it mean that there will be potentially the last generation of fintech companies because there will be a breakage in terms of new companies starting up, the FANGs and BATs coming into the space, so on and so forth? Like, how do you think the fintech space will be characterized after COVID in, say, the next 24 months or 18 to 24 months or so?
No, so I think to clarify, it's not necessarily digital payments companies that are going to become the winners in the space, right? But so much as, the most game-changing innovations in the world have always been funded by a combination of public and private investment and support. And when you have governments kind of being pushed by the pandemic to drive investment in things like a national real-time payments infrastructure, then you have a whole kind of heap of companies that we haven't even seen today, and that have business models that we don't yet understand, who will emerge to take advantage of the infrastructure the same way that apps kind of emerged, when the iPhone emerged. And I think that's what's going to be really exciting. But to go back to your original question, Kelvin, which was...
Longer term the key trends that will characterize the region, because to me it's always implication, right? So say if Vadim's view of, hey, the early stage companies will be wiped out during this period of time, it also means that, let's say 2 years down the road, there'll be less Series B companies because there's no stage company to become Series B company, right? So how would you all or even the FANGs and BATs are coming in with Ant Financial getting the digital bank license in Singapore. How do you think the landscape will be for fintech in the next 2 years or so, or key trends that will impact the landscape in the region?
Yeah, so I guess let me finish the point about about government financing, government funding of infrastructure, right? And the way it impacts startups going forward is that I think your unique selling proposition or your defense mode is going to change, because these kinds of investments will level the playing field. And so for companies, for funding societies, right, which kind of started in 2017, 2016, you've had to solve so many problems for yourself because there wasn't a payments infrastructure that enabled you. There wasn't an e-invoice kind of infrastructure that enabled you. And now that you can, what are the new ways in which funding societies can evolve to deliver a better, more fascinating product to your existing customers? I think that will be super fascinating.
So level playing field as a result of government interventions and support. But
Look, I'm not so familiar with fintech universe of Southeast Asia because for us it's just like a small part of in our investment strategy, basically kind of inherited from our previous funds. Because right now it's more and more we're focusing on a very large global problems rather than solving, payment infrastructure in Thailand. So I wouldn't call myself expert. Jennifer, I think, covered this space.
Understand. No, perfectly understand on that front. But you're co-invested into a fintech company together, so very excited about it. Let me just.
And since she's a specialist, I believe we've done a good thing.
Collaborative investments.
Indeed.
Let me just open up for a floor to see if there's any other questions. Any questions from the floor? Because I can keep going and going because there's so many things that I personally am interested and curious about. Let me just open up floor to see if there's any questions from the floor. As we wait for any questions coming in, I will keep going, and then until I see questions ping over. Do you see the FANGs and BATs expanding into fintech, or the Chinese players expanding into first in Singapore, eventually Southeast Asia, be a major threat to the local fintech scene or the local fintech players in your view? Because I think some would characterize it as a competition, some would characterize it as a strong boost in cooperation. And what is your take on this front with global players coming into a relatively nascent fintech industry scene in Southeast Asia?
I mean, I'm going to give you a cop-out answer because it's the answer I believe, which is that it's both, right? It always will be. There will always be niche areas where there is room for an early stage startup to make a name for itself. And, I think that what is positive about the global players coming in is not just the influx of talent, but also exit opportunities, right? For kind of startups that may already have made a name for themselves and are kind of a key foothold for what one of the BATs or the FANGs might want to do in the fintech area. We chose Singapore as kind of like the headquarters of the fund and chose to base ourselves here because of the presence of global players like Facebook, like Netflix, like Google. And not only because I think it kind of promotes a healthy ecosystem, but also because of kind of like the talent merry-go-round. I think it encourages entrepreneurship because people know that, if your startup fails, back in Singapore in the day, like, if you're a startup founder and you failed, you had no other option. Now you can go work at Facebook. And, you kind of take a couple years, learn some lessons, come back, do something else. And the quality of founders has gotten a lot better with the presence of global players here.
And to your point about, hey, there's actually a backup plan that you can join a corporate. Do you see that with this crisis, there's a tendency for flight to safety, not just for capital, but also humans or talent, such that starting up companies or working at companies become less fashionable?
I think, setting aside the question of founding a company, but joining a company as an employee, a startup as an employee, I think it's a cause and I don't know which one is the cause and which one is the effect. It's very clear, for example, through our portfolio that we did maybe not institute a moratorium on hiring, but definitely hired a lot slower than we would have otherwise expected to this year, right? So from that perspective, maybe there were no other jobs in the startup landscape. But no, I think that the pandemic has highlighted what has always been structural gaps in fintech and in health tech. And that will continue to be the case. Yesterday, I was a judge on the Slingshot MedTech, health tech, biotech pitch competition, and someone asked me, like, have you seen the nature of startups actually change that have made it to the finals? And it's like, no, they're tackling exactly the same kind of problems that they were last year and the year before that, because those problems in healthcare have been long-standing and will continue to be there after the pandemic is over and we're all vaccinated. So I don't think this may be a blip from kind of like people joining the startup world, but I don't think it's permanent.
So it's a blip, no long-term impact. Padim?
I completely agree with Jennifer that more players create more fruitful environment. So there is if every big player come to Singapore, for example, we've got like a very healthy financial industry because there are so many big players. So basically, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy that in attracting more talent, attracting more people, getting bigger, getting better. My little concern about startups in this place when big guys are coming is it going to be like Amazon, which basically destroyed all small shops? So there is a possibility. There is a possibility that it could be Amazonification. So these big guys will just destroy the small guys because either buy them, for example, Facebook. They are not destroying you; they just buying your startup and it's becoming like a part of Facebook. So there is a possibility that this environment will be divided between few very strong, very large players. There is possible because eventually it's like a financial muscles against regulation. So whether MIS will let them do it, perhaps, because they also like to have like many strong players and the amount of capital available from their side is like unlimited technically. So whatever they want to put in and play in Singapore does not bother a balance sheet in China.
I think I agree on that front, and it's partly why we have always tried to rush to become not just a market leader, but to us it's like how big a market leader. Like, am I 3x the competitor, 4x the competitor? Are we? What is our scale relative to DBS rather than say relative to our fintech peers? Though we do it observe the opposite, which is like I think what Vadim mentioned. Hey, the early stage companies may be wiped out. I think in the last 6 months, we have three FS staff has started their companies and have raised good money. So we saw very interesting different observations. I have one last question. I will ask one last question, and I'll just wait for on the floor to see if there's any further questions. Actually, I'm happy to just talk through because to me, I'm just learning things, and I'm happy to just have fun with the panel, and that's perfectly fine. And then I'll just summarize the conversations after that, right? So. I think just now Vadim mentioned about, hey, there's like unlikely will be a new normal because engagements remains important to folks, right? And I think a lot of us have become fitter during COVID because there's nothing better to do, might as well go and exercise. So what are the consumer behaviors that you think will stick, and what are the ones that will change, if at all? Let's start off with Jennifer and then to Vadim. Yep.
Well, I've definitely returned to the bars since they reopened, so there is that. Payments will shift online for sure. E-commerce will also shift. It will also become a much bigger and bigger chunk of the retail pie. And I was just thinking yesterday about, the impact that 2008 had on the retail industry, right? Which was, we saw some immediate bankruptcies right after the 2008 crisis hit. But then, over time, that's really kind of highlighted the weaknesses in retail companies and how and how that kind of gave room for e-commerce to emerge. And I think I think the pandemic may ultimately become the second kind of body blow to the retail industry here. What are the consumer benefits? I think this kind of new focus on health will continue, but to a smaller extent. Humans will always be driven by our urge to eat junk food and laze around on a couch. And so we may all adopt digital therapeutics or like wearables, and we may all walk 10,000 steps a day, but I think we may not ever kind of transition to a super healthy society the way we would have hoped.
So largely some changes, but likely stay the same is a blip. Vadim?
I'm 55. It's this crisis is probably my crisis number 6 or 7, whatever. So every crisis, people say, okay, it will be new normal. Everything will be different. Look, nothing changes so much. So Jennifer completely right. Like some like small changes coming. So if retail was weak even before crisis, the big shops were closing. Okay, it's a complete death stroke for them. So like Robinson, after like hundreds of years, it disappeared. So, but it was on a way to disappearing. If it's not this crisis, it will be disappeared like in 5 years on the road. It just speed up. But I don't see that it will be like a paradigm shift, and we will be using flying cars after COVID finished. So I don't think all this like small like movement in a trend. Okay, we will use a little bit more digital instruments. We will use a little bit more e-commerce. We will use a little bit more, fitness trackers. So, but like it will not be paradigm shift. Which will be changing our lives forever.
I'll just do a quick summary, and then I'll leave. I'll have Jennifer as well as Vadim share their last advice to startups. So I think overall,
we don't say last. We say maybe a final for the moment. The last advice is like supposed to go out of this panel and die. I'm Russian. We are very superstitious.
Interim advice as we come to the end. Personally, I really enjoyed the conversation, and to me, I had a lot of fun chatting with you, and I learned a ton. Right? I think one observation about everyone thinks about new normal and expect things to change significantly. I think both panelists reckons that actually things will not change as much as we think. It's very interesting. It is consistent with what Ray Dalio's article recently talked about, right? That things will probably be a lot more opposite of what you would expect. Because human behaviors don't change as much. I thought that's really interesting insight in my view. I think another few insights is that there is opportunities available, especially with a leveling playing field, by virtue of infrastructure that's being built up by the governments across different countries, and that there are pockets of opportunities, especially at the niche areas. But startups will have to sharpen their strategy and can take advantage of this COVID period to sharpen that as the market becomes slower. Interesting to see that from an investment perspective, there is also more collaboration between investors compared to competition like last time, and the strategics are still investing. In fact, we personally experienced the same, that quite a few of our investors are strategics. We will be announcing something next week for funding societies, and previously even in Q1, Bank Rakyat Indonesia has invested into us, and Bank Rakyat Indonesia is one of the biggest bank in Indonesia. So we do see a lot more collaborative investors and strategics coming in. And finally, we see that there's a flight to quality, flight to safety, that the investors are still investing, but you need to prove that you are the quality you want, and to the extent that you can't, money will be piling into you, not just be it in tech, but also outside of tech as well. So really enjoy the conversation. I've learned a ton, right? So with that, I'll have Jennifer and Jennifer first, and then Vadim to share their interim advice as we come to the end of the panel. Jennifer.
Oh dear. Interim advice to startups. Okay, so here's one. Don't think of COVID-19 as this massive opportunity where, don't be trendy, I suppose, I think is maybe the better way to put it. I've seen so many pitches, especially in health tech, but even in fintech, right, that kind of talk about, here's the ways in which we're relevant for this COVID-19 world. And it's like, well, there were lots of problems in Southeast Asia across the region when it came to access and affordability of financial services and healthcare, like before COVID-19 hit. They will be there after. And so think about where your market needs are. Think about what problems you're actually trying to address in the long term and not in the short term. That's as much as I can come up with on short notice. I'm sorry.
Vadim?
I will finish with a joke. Rabbits in a forest, they died from suffering. Everyone is hunting them. They are hiding all the time. And they come into wise owl asking for advice. Owl, what we need to do? How to stop our suffering? And owl telling them, look, you need to become hedgehogs. They said, look, we are rabbits. How do we become a hedgehog? Don't bother with me with the small stuff. I'm providing you with strategic advice. So this is what.
Got it. With that, really appreciate the time that Vadim and Jennifer has spent with us, and really learned a lot along the way. And personally, I think that there is, while COVID is a big thing to us, and we feel it now, and currently, it seems like consensus is that it will be a blip at the overall scheme of things, and that if we focus on the longer term impact as well as customers, there are a lot more opportunities in Southeast Asia. And with that, I will conclude this session. Really, thank you, panelists Jennifer and Vadim. Thanks a lot, the audience.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Cheers.
It's a pleasure.
Okay. Do I just log off and leave, or?